Hello, wanderers, and welcome to Night's Embrace. Tonight we delve into the lore of one of the most iconic factions in the Fallout universe, the Brotherhood of Steel. Sit back and relax as we explore their origins, history across the wasteland, and the evolution of their ideals. If you enjoy deep dives into Fallout lore, please consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this. Origins, the Mariposa Rebellion, and Exodus. The story of the Brotherhood of Steel begins in the final days before the Great War of 2077, at a secretive government facility called Mariposa Military Base in California. U.S. military scientists were conducting experiments with a biochemical agent known as the Forced Evolutionary Virus, FEV. This research aimed to create super soldiers, but it involved unethical human experimentation on military prisoners. The base's security detail was a unit of U.S. Army soldiers under the command of Captain Roger Maxson. Crucially, neither Maxson nor his men had been told the truth about the scientists' work. In October 2077, Captain Maxson discovered the horrifying extent of the FEV experiments taking place under his protection. The revelation that the United States government was experimenting on its own citizens was a breaking point. The senior officer at Mariposa, Colonel Spindle, suffered a mental breakdown and locked himself in his office, leaving Captain Maxson as the highest remaining authority. Acting decisively, Maxson arrested the lead scientist, Robert Anderson, and interrogated him about the project. Anderson's unapologetic attitude toward the cruel experiments only fueled Maxson's anger. In disgust, Maxson executed Anderson by firing squad, an act that sent shockwaves through both the science team and his own soldiers. One by one, the other Mariposa scientists were also tried and executed for their crimes. Maxson had effectively declared his unit an open insurrection against the government conspirators, a move later known as the Mariposa Rebellion. After eliminating the scientists, Captain Maxson attempted to reach his military superiors for guidance, but received no response. With the chain of command in shambles and evidence of government atrocities before him, Maxson made a fateful decision. He used Mariposa's radio to broadcast a secession from the United States. To any survivors listening, he condemned the government's actions and declared that his unit would no longer take orders from a regime that sanctioned such horrors. Among those who heard the broadcast was an old friend of Maxson's, Lieutenant Elizabeth Taggarty, stationed across the country in Appalachia. Though initially shocked by Maxson's treasonous message, Taggarty kept her radio channel open, a decision that would prove significant for the Brotherhood's future. Only days after Maxson's declaration, on October 23, 2077, the world was engulfed in nuclear fire. The Great War began and ended in mere hours as nuclear weapons rained down across the globe. At Mariposa, alarms blared, and the base went into lockdown. The facility's thick walls and emergency protocols shielded Maxson's people from the immediate destruction outside. They survived the cataclysm unscathed, even as society collapsed around them. For a brief moment, the soldiers and their families huddled in the base, protected from the radioactive fallout that now blanketed California. Recognizing that the war had effectively ended the United States government, Maxson prepared to lead his people to safety. With radiation spreading and supplies at Mariposa limited, he organized an evacuation on October 27, 2077, just 4 days after the bombs fell. Captain Maxson gathered the 40-odd soldiers under his command, along with their spouses and children, and abandoned Mariposa. This journey through the post-nuclear wasteland would later be called the Exodus. Before departing, they sealed the base behind them and buried the executed scientists' bodies in the desert as a grim reminder of the old world's sins. The Exodus was perilous. The The desolate lands were rife with radiation, dust storms, and the chaotic aftermath of nuclear war. Maxon's caravan headed toward a pre-war government bunker known as Lost Hills, rumored to be built to withstand doomsday. As they traveled, they faced thirst, hunger, and exposure to the elements. Tragically, many did not survive the harsh trek. Among the casualties was Maxon's own wife, who succumbed to the unforgiving conditions. Maxon's teenage son, Roger Maxon II, survived, but the toll on the group was severe. After several weeks of arduous travel, the remnants of Maxon's followers finally reached the Lost Hills bunker in California. In November 2077, they descended into the vast underground facility, exhausted but alive. Lost Hills would become their new sanctuary, and the headquarters of a new order rising from the old world's ashes. Forging a new order at Lost Hills. Having secured the Lost Hills bunker, Captain Roger Maxon and his followers began the difficult task of rebuilding and redefining their purpose. Inside the bunker's reinforced walls, the survivors found ample technology, supplies, and shelter from the radioactive wasteland above. But survival was only the first step. Maxon realized that his group, composed of disciplined soldiers and their families, had the potential to become something more than just another band of refugees. In the absence of the United States, he envisioned creating a new organization dedicated to preventing humanity from repeating the mistakes of the past. In the initial months after the Great War, Maxon's priorities were caring for his people and keeping them safe. The group was still nominally a U.S. military unit, and they operated under military discipline to maintain order. They provided what aid they could to nearby survivors, acting as an armed protective force in the region. However, as time went on, Maxon began to formulate a broader ideology. Observing despair taking hold among those around him, he became convinced that they needed a stronger sense of identity and mission to avoid falling into hopelessness. Drawing inspiration from history, Maxon proposed a new set of traditions and symbols for his fledgling society. He often cited the example of medieval knights and scribes who preserved knowledge during the Dark Ages after the fall of Rome. In Maxon's view, his group would become modern knights, guardians of knowledge and technology in a new dark age. He introduced a structured hierarchy. Inspired by chivalric orders, members would adopt titles such as knight, scribe, and paladin. These ranks replaced the old U.S. Army designations, symbolizing a break from the corrupt pre-war government and the birth of something new. Maxon also drafted a code of ethics and principles, later known simply as the Brotherhood Codex, to guide behavior. It emphasized duty, the protection and preservation of technology, and an almost monastic dedication to safeguarding humanity's future. It took time for everyone to accept these dramatic changes. Some of Maxon's followers were initially skeptical of discarding their familiar military ranks and traditions. Lieutenant Elizabeth Taggarty, communicating by satellite from Appalachia, voiced doubts about the need for mythology and new titles. But Maxon was patient and persuasive. He argued that words have power. By calling themselves knights and paladins, they would build a new identity that could inspire hope. Over the next few years, the transformation took hold. By around 2150, some 75 years after the Great War, the Brotherhood had evolved into a major power in New California. Roger Maxon was acknowledged as the founder and first High Elder of the Brotherhood of Steel, and his ideals became the bedrock of their doctrine. During this period, Maxon also kept in contact with Taggarty's Appalachian unit. Using surviving military satellites and radio equipment, he reached out across the continent to any other military remnants who might be listening. Incredibly, he managed to establish a dialogue with Tagady's Rangers in Appalachia, former U.S. Army Rangers who had survived the war in the mountains of West Virginia. Though they were separated by thousands of miles of wasteland, Maxson and Tagady were old friends, and that bond helped bridge the initial trust gap. Tagady had been wary of Maxson after his secession from the army, but as he shared the truth of the government's atrocities at Mariposa, her faith in the old U.S. system was shaken. Over the winter of 2077 to 2078, Tagady's unit sheltered at a place called Camp Venture in Appalachia. There they continued to talk with Maxson via radio. Gradually, Tagady was won over by Maxson's vision. She saw the need for a new path forward and agreed to align with Maxson's nascent brotherhood. By the early 2080s, Tagady and her soldiers formally adopted the Brotherhood of Steel name and ranks as well, becoming the first Eastern chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel. Under Maxson's guidance, these two groups, one at Lost Hills in the west and one in Appalachia in the east, began to grow in parallel, sharing information and goals despite the distance between them. Back in California, the Brotherhood expanded cautiously. The devastation of the Great War meant that communities were few and far between, but Maxson's Brotherhood made contact with other survivors over time. They encountered refugees and scavengers wandering the wasteland, as well as small settlements rebuilding from the ruins. In these early years, the Brotherhood's attitude toward outsiders was cautiously helpful. They traded with local settlements, offering protection, medical aid, and technical expertise in exchange for supplies. As their reputation grew, they even welcomed a few new members who proved themselves worthy. For instance, a National Guard unit that had survived near Mariposa eventually joined with the Brotherhood, bringing additional skilled soldiers into the fold. Each new recruit underwent extensive and grueling training. Even experienced military veterans found Brotherhood training tougher than anything they'd known before, as Maxson wanted only the most dedicated in his ranks. Still, the Brotherhood remained selective. Maxson's core belief was that technology was the key to humanity's future, but only if kept in the right hands. The cataclysm of the Great War had been driven by technological warfare and the hubris of old-world governments. To prevent a second apocalypse, Maxson believed that advanced weapons and knowledge must be carefully controlled. Thus, as they recovered pre-war arms, power armor, and scientific data, the Brotherhood stored these treasures safely in their bunkers. They saw themselves as the guardians of humanity's technological heritage, not to use it for conquest or personal gain, but to protect it until civilization was wise enough to wield such power responsibly. This philosophy would guide the Brotherhood's actions, for good or ill, for centuries to come. The Appalachian Chapter, Tagady Sips, Thunder. While the Brotherhood's founding chapter settled into Lost Hills, the Appalachian Chapter, under Paladin Elizabeth Tagady, was forging its own path on the other side of the continent. Tagady's unit, nicknamed Tagady's Thunder, had been participating in wargame exercises in the mountains of Appalachia, former West Virginia, when the Great War erupted. The Thunder, composed of U.S. Army Rangers, survived the initial nuclear strikes by sheltering in a cave complex near Spruce Knob. In the chaotic aftermath, with military command networks destroyed, Tagady struggled to find direction for her troops. That's when Captain Maxson's calls for survivors over the satellite link crackled through. Despite knowing Maxson had rebelled, Tagady listened. Her friendship with him overcame her hesitation, and soon she learned of the dark secret that drove him to turn against the government. The news of FEV experiments and the betrayal by those in power deeply unsettled Tagady and her soldiers. Facing a world without support and the collapse of the United States, Tagady decided her priority was survival. In late 2077, She led her rangers out of the mountains to find a secure base. They eventually took over Camp Venture, an old pre-war survival training camp in the wilderness. As winter set in, the soldiers of Tagadi's Thunder huddled in the camp, trying to keep their morale up. Over the following months, Maxon's regular communications planted the seeds of a new purpose for them. Though Tagadi was initially resistant to Maxon's lofty ideas of knights and scribes, reality in Appalachia was grim enough to make her consider any plan that could give her people hope. After witnessing scavengers, raiders, and frightened survivors all around, Tagadi began to see the wisdom in Maxon's proposal for a structured order. By 2082, Tagadi and her troops formally joined the Brotherhood of Steel. They adopted the Brotherhood's ranks and ideals, with Tagadi herself taking the title of Paladin to lead the Appalachian chapter. Many in her unit were career military and found the transition strange at first, trading U.S. Army ranks for titles like Knight and Scribe felt like play acting to some. But Tagadi enforced the change, and over time, the symbolism helped forge a new identity among the soldiers. They were no longer simply a stray army unit cut off from the chain of command. They were brothers and sisters of steel with a higher calling. Under Paladin Tagadi's leadership, the Appalachian Brotherhood established multiple bases across West Virginia. Camp Venture became their primary training ground for new recruits. Strict trials weeded out those not tough enough. In one instance, only 4 out of 9 initial volunteer recruits passed the brutal ranger-style training to become Brotherhood initiates. Nonetheless, word of the Brotherhood spread, and more survivors, especially ex-military personnel, sought them out to enlist. Tagadi favored those with military backgrounds, trusting their discipline, but as time went on she gradually opened up to any capable wastelander who showed dedication to the Brotherhood's cause. The ranks of Tagadi's chapter slowly swelled, though they remained much smaller than the California Core chapter. In these early years, the Appalachian Brotherhood's activities started to put them into contact, and sometimes conflict, with other survivor factions. One notable group in the region were the Responders, a humanitarian organization of volunteers, doctors, firefighters, police, and citizens devoted to helping people after the disaster. Initially, the Brotherhood's militarism and obsession with securing weapons led to tensions with the Responders. For example, in 2082, there was an incident known as the Christmas Flood in Appalachia, where communications and goodwill between the two groups were strained. The Brotherhood was aggressively stockpiling munitions for the greater good, which some Responders saw as hoarding. However, common threats would eventually push them to cooperate. In May 2086, the Appalachian Brotherhood and the Responders found themselves fighting side by side during the Battle of Huntersville. Huntersville was a town overrun by super mutants, twisted, green-skinned giants that were terrorizing the region. Unbeknownst to Tagadi, these mutants were an early result of West Tech's FEV research that had spilled into Appalachia, similar in origin to those that would later plague California. The Brotherhood and Responders allied to defend nearby settlements from the mutant onslaught. The battle was fierce and costly. The super mutants were physically powerful and hard to kill, and the town became a war zone of flying bullets and roaring mutants. Ultimately, thanks to superior tactics and the use of power armor, the Brotherhood-led forces prevailed and cleared Huntersville of the mutant threat. The victory came at a price. Some of Tagadi's best knights, like a young soldier named Lieutenant De Silva, fell during the fighting and were laid to rest in makeshift grave sites. Nevertheless, the cooperation at Huntersville improved relations between the Brotherhood and Responders. proving they could find a common purpose against the wasteland's dangers. By the mid-2080s, Roger Maxson at Lost Hills was refining the Brotherhood's overarching mission. In the wake of humanity's near extinction, he decided the Brotherhood should formally take on the role of preserving all knowledge for the future. In 2086, Maxson issued a mandate that the Brotherhood of Steel would gather, record, and safeguard the collective knowledge of mankind. The goal was to act as a catalyst for civilization's rebirth when the time was right. This marked an expansion of the Brotherhood's purpose. Not only would they secure technology, but also books, scientific data, and historical records, everything needed to rebuild society one day. The response within the Brotherhood was mixed. Many members embraced this scholarly mission enthusiastically, seeing it as a noble endeavor. Others accepted it grudgingly, still more interested in practical military matters. In Appalachia, one notable dissenter was Sergeant Hank Madigan, a seasoned member of Taggarty's unit. Madigan grew disillusioned with the Brotherhood's increasingly strict focus on technology and protocol. Not long after Maxson's new mandate was declared, Madigan left the Brotherhood entirely, opting to join the responders whose humanitarian focus better aligned with his personal values. His departure highlighted a truth about the Brotherhood. Not everyone who wore the insignia agreed with all of Maxson's edicts, especially as the organization's identity evolved. Before the Brotherhood could fully pivot to its mission of knowledge preservation, a dire new threat emerged in Appalachia. Toward the late 2080s, strange winged creatures began to terrorize the region. The Brotherhood scribes and scientists had never seen anything like them. Colossal bat-like monstrosities that spewed deadly radioactive spores. Locals began to call these creatures scorch beasts. Even more alarming, people attacked by the beasts or exposed to the spores were turned into violent, zombie-like beings known as the Scorched, who mindlessly served the Scorch Beast's will. It was unlike any challenge the Brotherhood had faced, an existential threat that could potentially overrun human civilization if not stopped. Paladin Taggarty's reports to Lost Hills convey the gravity of the situation. Maxson's Brotherhood scientists, including a brilliant scribe named Haley Takano, worked with Taggarty's scribes to analyze the Scorch Beast threat. They quickly concluded that if left unchecked, these creatures could multiply and devastate entire regions, possibly a doomsday scenario rivaling the Great War itself. In response, Lost Hills sent whatever aid it could via the communication network, blueprints for advanced weapons and devices to combat the beasts. One such design was a prototype sonic generator intended to disrupt the creature's echolocation, and an automated research program that could help the Appalachian chapter continue studying the scorch beasts, even if cut off from California. However, the resources were limited. Physically sending manpower or large supplies across a continent of ruins was impossible at the time. Taggarty led her Brotherhood in a fierce war against the scorch beasts and their scorched thralls. She pleaded with Maxson for permission to use the ultimate weapons at their disposal. Appalachian nuclear missile silos still contained dormant atomic warheads, remnants of the pre-war military. Taggarty saw launching a tactical nuclear strike on the subterranean fissures where the scorch beasts nested as a potentially decisive solution. But Roger Maxson flatly refused to authorize any use of nuclear weapons. Having lived through the annihilation wrought by nukes, Maxson found the idea of employing the same firepower, even against monsters, morally abhorrent. He ordered Taggarty to find another way, and to hold the line without repeating the sins of the past. Loyal to Maxson's code, Taggarty obeyed, though it meant her fight would be harder. By the early 2090s, Communication between Lost Hills and the Appalachian chapter grew strained and sporadic. The old satellite and radio relays were failing, and the constant battles left little time for long-range messaging. Maxon's last directive to Tagady, before the link went down, was simple: do everything possible to contain the scorch beasts, but do not use nuclear arms. After that, the Eastern chapter was on its own, isolated from the rest of the Brotherhood. Tagady's soldiers fought with valor but were slowly being worn down. Wave after wave of scorched creatures attacked settlements and Brotherhood positions. Each victory came at the cost of more lives that the chapter could not replace. By 2093, their numbers were so reduced that Tagady had to consolidate forces. They abandoned Camp Venture, their original training camp, and fell back to two major strongholds: Fort Defiance, a fortified former mental hospital atop a mountain, and Thunder Mountain Power Plant. These last redoubts were where the remaining knights and paladins made their stand, even as their supply lines dwindled and local allies grew scarce. Desperate to end the nightmare, Tagady devised a final, bold plan: Operation Touchdown. Launched in January 2095, this operation was a direct assault on the largest known scorch beast lair deep in the caverns below the Cranberry Bog region. Tagady led a strike team of her best warriors into the heart of the nest. Astonishingly, Operation Touchdown met with partial success. The strike team managed to slay several of the massive scorch beast queens underground, and for a brief moment, the onslaught above stopped. But the victory came at a terrible price. None of the brave men and women who went into that cavern emerged alive. Paladin Tagady herself perished in the depths, fighting until her last breath to slay the monsters. Her second in command, and every knight with her, also fell in battle. The few Brotherhood defenders who remained topside at Fort Defiance heard one final radio transmission: touchdown, the code word indicating the mission's objective was accomplished, before silence. For a week after Operation Touchdown, no scorch beast attacks were reported on the surface. It seemed Tagady's sacrifice had perhaps turned the tide, but the respite was fleeting. The surviving Brotherhood members in Appalachia were now critically low in number and leadership. Senior Knight Daniel Rogers, nicknamed Deaky, took provisional command at Fort Defiance after Tagady was gone. The handful of knights and junior scribes left were exhausted, wounded, and nearly out of resources. Then scorch beasts began to reappear, whether drawn by vengeful instinct or simply more emerging from other fissures. The nightmare was not over. In mid-August 2095, the end came for the Appalachian chapter. Swarms of scorched infantry and multiple scorch beasts besieged Fort Defiance and Thunder Mountain in a coordinated assault. The fortress that had held for years finally faltered. One by one, the last Brotherhood defenders fell as they made their last stand. Knight Wilson, Scribe Grant, and a pair of teenage squires, under their tutelage, fought until they were overrun inside Fort Defiance's walls. Before being overwhelmed, they managed to send out a final distress message over the radio: Defiance has fallen. It was a cryptic warning that few in the wasteland understood at the time, but it marked the extinction of the original Appalachian Brotherhood. At Thunder Mountain Power Plant, two young squires were the last holdouts, and they too were eventually silenced. By August 19, 2095, the Brotherhood of Steel's first Eastern chapter had been wiped out. All that remained were abandoned bunkers full of weapons and research, and the recorded logs of their heroic struggle, left behind for anyone who might later discover them. For decades afterward, Appalachia would remember Tagady's thunder in hushed tones. They had stood against horrors no one else could face, and paid the ultimate price. Back in California, however, the fate of the Appalachian chapter was shrouded in mystery. The communications failure meant that Lost Hills never learned exactly what happened. Roger Maxson and the Western Brotherhood only knew that at some point the radio went silent and they could no longer reach their comrades in the East. The assumption was that the Appalachian chapter had likely been lost. The West would have to continue the Brotherhood's mission without knowing the outcome of Taggarty's war. Reinforcements arrive, reclaiming Appalachia. Long after the fall of Taggarty's chapter, the Brotherhood of Steel would return to Appalachia, but not until many years later. Roger Maxson never forgot about the eastern branch that he had cultivated. He had lost contact, but he held out hope that perhaps some vestige of the Brotherhood still survived in those distant hills. As the Brotherhood grew stronger in New California in the early 2100s, plans were made to send a follow-up expedition eastward. High Elder Maxson authorized what came to be called the First Expeditionary Force, a small mobile detachment whose mission was to journey across the continent, investigate what became of the Appalachian chapter, secure any important technology in the region, and, if possible, rekindle the Brotherhood's presence there. Organizing such an expedition was no small feat in a fractured post-war America. Travel was treacherous, and the expedition would receive no support once it left known territories. Around the year 2102, Maxson gave the green light. He appointed Paladin Layla Ramoni, a distinguished soldier and former U.S. National Guardsman, as the leader of the force. Ramoni was known for her determination and loyalty to the Brotherhood's cause. Alongside her, a young but brilliant scribe named Odessa Valdez volunteered to provide technical expertise, replacing her mentor Scribe Takano, who fell ill. 3 knights comprised the rest of the team: Knight Daniel Shin, Knight Alan Connors, and Knight Matthew Thornberry, all handpicked for their skills and dedication. Notably, Knight Connors and Paladin Ramoni had been close friends since their National Guard days, and Knight Shin was a rising star, known for his strict adherence to the Brotherhood Codex. In late 2102, the First Expeditionary Force set out from Lost Hills and began the arduous trek east. They traveled primarily on foot, occasionally using improvised vehicles or mounts where terrain allowed, and carrying as much advanced gear as they could haul. The journey of roughly 2,000 miles would test their endurance and unity. Along the way, they encountered pockets of civilization and ruins of cities long dead. When they crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains, the expedition clashed with a band of raiders who had somehow obtained energy weapons and fusion cores, a worrying sign of dangerous tech in the wrong hands. Knight Thornberry heroically led a counter-raid to rescue a captive squad of Brotherhood scouts from these raiders. Though successful, Thornberry was ordered by Ramani to escort the wounded scouts back west to Lost Hills, reducing the expedition's strength but ensuring those soldiers survived. As the remaining team pushed on, communication with Lost Hills grew intermittent and then ceased entirely. By the time Ramani's force traversed the Great Plains and reached the Rocky Mountains, their long-range radios could no longer reach California. For months, Lost Hills heard nothing from the expedition. Elder Maxson sent encrypted messages into the void, hoping Ramani would receive them. One such message even urged them to abandon their primary mission if needed to survive. Getting no response, Maxson feared the worst, but privately he held on, knowing Ramani's resolve. He cautioned her in one secret transmission that if the silence continued, the Brotherhood's ruling council might brand the expedition deserters, a political reality he was struggling to prevent. This only added to the pressure on Ramani as she led her people deeper into unknown lands. Despite the trials, The first expeditionary force reached the outskirts of Appalachia by late 2103. Upon arrival, Paladin Ramani made a bold move. She broadcast a message on all frequencies in the region, declaring the Brotherhood of Steel's return. In this transmission, she announced that her team would be taking control of a facility called the ATLS Observatory, a pre-war research observatory, to establish a new base, and she warned any squatters or hostile forces to vacate the premises. This declaration of intent was both a statement to any survivors that the Brotherhood was back and a psychological tactic to avoid unnecessary skirmishes. Atlas Observatory, soon renamed Fort Atlas, became the foothold for the Brotherhood's resurgence in Appalachia. Rahamani and her knights secured the building, finding it largely abandoned, and immediately set about fortifying it. They also began recruiting locals, carefully at first, to bolster their numbers. With Tagadi's chapter long gone, Appalachia had not seen active Brotherhood forces in many years, so Rahamani's arrival caused quite a stir among the wastelanders. Some welcomed the idea of knights in power armor coming to restore order. Others were suspicious, having heard only stories of the Brotherhood's rigid ways. One of Ramani's initial objectives was to recover lost technology and weapons caches, rumored to be left behind by Tagadi's fallen chapter. Over the following months, her team embarked on missions to old Brotherhood sites like the defunct Fort Defiance and other hidden bunkers. They salvaged what they could: stockpiles of energy weapons, suits of power armor, and invaluable research data on the Scorch Plague and Scorch Beasts. In doing so, they began piecing together the story of what had happened to Tagadi's Thunder. Discovering the recordings and journals documenting the chapter's demise was a sobering experience for Paladin Ramani and her comrades. They learned how valiantly the Appalachian Brotherhood had fought and the tragedy of their last stand. These revelations steeled their resolve to ensure that their new chapter would not suffer the same fate. However, even as the Brotherhood re-established itself in Appalachia, internal tensions began to surface within the expedition members. Knight Daniel Shin was a strict traditionalist. He held the Brotherhood Codex and its rules as sacred. Paladin Ramani, while loyal to the Brotherhood, believed in a more pragmatic approach when dealing with the people of the wasteland. These differing philosophies led to friction. A pivotal incident occurred during the journey east. Before reaching Appalachia, the team encountered a frontier settlement under siege by raiders. Empathizing with the desperate settlers, Ramani and Shin made a controversial decision. They distributed some of the Brotherhood's own advanced weapons to the villagers so they could defend themselves. This was a direct violation of the usual Brotherhood policy, forbidding outsiders from possessing such technology. Unfortunately, the plan backfired disastrously. The settlers were not trained to use the energy weapons effectively, and the raiders still overran the town. In the chaos, Knight Connors was killed, and the raiders even managed to steal back some of the technology. Emerging stronger than before, Shin was furious at what he saw as a reckless breach of Brotherhood protocol. He argued that by arming outsiders, they had betrayed their mission to keep technology safe. And worse, their actions ended up aiding the enemy. By the time they settled into Fort Atlas, this philosophical divide threatened the unity of the new chapter. Paladin Ramani felt deep guilt over the failure to save the settlement and the loss of Knight Connors, but she still believed that the Brotherhood should use its power to help people when possible. Knight Shin, however, became even more rigid, insisting that Ramani report her own lapse in judgment to the Brotherhood's superiors, which was impossible with communications down and even suggesting that their group might face censure or punishment for deviating from the codex. The young scribe Valdez and the remaining knight Thornberry, who rejoined them later, often found themselves caught in the middle, trying to maintain harmony. Despite these internal struggles, the Brotherhood's presence in Appalachia brought a semblance of stability to parts of the region. They drove off bands of raiders, subdued scattered supermutants left in remote areas, and worked on finishing the automated research that Tagadi's team had started, particularly research into a cure or solution for the scorched plague. Using the data and equipment from Voltech University that Scribe Grant had left behind, Scribe Valdez set up projects to continue analyzing the scorched phenomenon, hoping to provide future generations a way to combat or prevent such an outbreak. Romani's chapter also opened limited relations with existing Appalachian communities, a bit more diplomatically than Tagadi's rather insular approach decades prior. They traded and communicated with settlements like Foundation and Crater formed by survivors and former raiders, offering protection from threats in exchange for supplies and information. Over time, Romani planned to train new local recruits. She famously asserted that even a handful of dedicated people could be the seed to regrow the Brotherhood's ranks. 3 is plenty to start a new chapter, she remarked to a follower, emphasizing quality over quantity. The ultimate fate of Paladin Rahmani's Appalachian expedition remains to be seen. As of the early years of their arrival, they successfully replanted the Brotherhood banner in the region and continued to uphold the fight against danger, such as remnants of the scorched. Eventually, communication with the West would be restored, and the Appalachian chapter would presumably be reintegrated with the broader Brotherhood network. But, in these early days of reclamation, the chapter under Rahmani stood on its own, a small but determined light in the darkness of post-war Appalachia. Whether their story would end in triumph or tragedy, only time would tell. What is certain is that the Brotherhood of Steel had returned to Appalachia, proving that even after catastrophic losses, the Brotherhood's spirit and mission could rise again where it had once fallen. War against the Vipers. Back on the West Coast, the Brotherhood of Steel at Lost Hills continued to grow and interact with the surrounding world. By around 2150, the Brotherhood had evolved into one of the major powers in New California. Roger Maxon's son, Maxon II, had succeeded him as High Elder after the Elder Maxon's death from cancer in 2135. Under Maxon II and the Council of Elders, the Brotherhood expanded its influence beyond the bunker walls. They established consistent trade routes with nearby settlements, such as the Hub, one of the largest trading towns emerging in the region. Brotherhood patrols kept the roads around Lost Hills clear of dangers, and in return, caravans from the Hub delivered goods directly to the Brotherhood. This was a time of relative prosperity and stability for the Order. However, new threats were always on the horizon. Around 2150, rumors reached Lost Hills of a particularly dangerous band of raiders gathering in the southern deserts. They called themselves the Vipers, a savage cult-like group that worshipped snakes and practiced poisoning techniques. In fact, the Vipers were a reconstituted version of an old gang that had existed shortly after the war, now growing in numbers and fanaticism. They were known for ambushing travelers, conducting ritualistic sacrifices, and accumulating an arsenal of weaponry from their raids. The Brotherhood, with its mission to safeguard humanity and technology, could not ignore this rising danger on their doorstep. The conflict with the Vipers began as a series of skirmishes. In the years around 2150, Brotherhood scouts and Viper raiding parties clashed in the wastelands. Initially, the Brotherhood elders saw these fights as opportunities for combat training. Confident in their superior equipment and power armor, they dispatched small squads of knights and paladins to eliminate the raider encampments. High Elder Maxim II himself led one such squad in 2155, believing a show of force would cause the vipers to scatter. What he underestimated was the vipers' fanatical zeal. During the battle, as expected, many vipers broke and fled at the sight of armored Brotherhood soldiers, but the vipers' high priests and die-hard warriors stood their ground, launching waves of poison-tipped arrows and darts. At one point, Maxim II removed his power armor helmet, perhaps to get a better view or issue orders. In that exposed moment, a single poisoned arrow fired by a viper archer found a gap and nicked him. The toxin worked quickly. Despite the Brotherhood's medical aid, the High Elder succumbed within hours. The death of Maxim II was a sobering shock to the Brotherhood. This was the first time one of their elders had been killed in action by wasteland adversaries. His son John Maxim, grandson of the original Roger Maxim, was a rising star among the paladins and had been showing great promise. In the wake of his father's death, John Maxim was elevated to the Brotherhood's ruling council, and a few years later would become High Elder himself. Meanwhile, another prominent figure stepped up. Rhombus, a seasoned paladin known for his fierce combat skills and unwavering loyalty, took charge of the Brotherhood's military response. Under Rhombus's direction, the Brotherhood unleashed its fury on the Vipers. What had begun as a series of skirmishes turned into a full-fledged campaign of extermination. Squads of Brotherhood paladins hunted the Vipers across the deserts and mountains, clad in their iconic T-51B power armor and armed with high-tech weaponry. They were determined to avenge Maxim II and eliminate the Viper threat once and for all. Over the span of a month, battle after battle saw the Vipers decimated. Their largest settlements were assaulted and burned. Most of the Viper raiders were killed outright, and only small scattered remnants fled far to the north or east into remote badlands to escape Brotherhood retribution. By the end of that campaign, the Vipers as an organized faction were effectively destroyed. Some survivors undoubtedly lived on as minor raider gangs, and indeed, tiny pockets of Vipers would surface in later years, never approaching their former strength, but they were no longer a significant power in New California. This victory solidified the Brotherhood's reputation as protectors of the region. It also propelled Rhombus and John Maxim to prominent leadership roles. John Maxim officially became High Elder in 2159, while Rhombus was appointed head paladin responsible for all military operations. These two men would guide the Brotherhood through a golden era. The Vipers campaign had another important outcome. It increased contact between the Brotherhood and civilian settlements. During the anti-Viper operations, the Brotherhood had sent emissaries to coordinate with the hub merchants and other towns to ensure any fleeing Vipers were reported and tracked. Through these efforts, formal trade and diplomatic relations were strengthened. Soon after the war, caravans were making regular stops directly at Lost Hills, exchanging food, water, and raw materials for Brotherhood tech or services. On one occasion late in that decade, the hub's water merchants attempted a more aggressive deal. They offered a massive quantity of water in exchange for a cache of Brotherhood weapons. The elders prudently refused, unwilling to arm outsiders so heavily. A few brazen merchants tried to hire thieves to steal technology from the bunker, but those attempts failed, and the culprits were caught. The elders ultimately decided against any punitive raids on hub territory for this incident, opting to maintain a peaceful if watchful partnership. The Brotherhood's policy remained clear. Advanced weapons and tech were not to be given away freely, no matter the barter offer. By the time these events settled, the Brotherhood of Steel stood at its zenith in New California, under High Elder John Maxon's counsel and the steady stewardship of head paladin Rhombus, the organization controlled the largest stockpile of pre-war technology in the wasteland and commanded respect from friend and foe alike. The supermutant threat, Fallout 1. The next great challenge to the Brotherhood's mission emerged from the shadows of the northern wastelands. In the year 2161, reports filtered down to Lost Hills of strange, hulking creatures roaming the ruins, beings that were human-like in shape, but far taller and more muscular, with coarse green skin. These were the first whispers of what would come to be known as super mutants. At first, the Brotherhood knew little about them. They were elusive and could not be found in large numbers near Brotherhood territory. That changed in October 2161, when a patrol of Brotherhood knights in the Badlands happened upon the corpse of a super mutant warrior. The knights were alarmed by the size and brute strength suggested by the dead mutant's physique, so they hauled the body back to Lost Hills for study. Head scribe Vree, the chief scientist of the Brotherhood, conducted a thorough autopsy on the mutant corpse. Her findings were startling. The creature was genetically human, but had been grotesquely altered by some process. Every cell was brimming with an unknown virus or mutagen, which accelerated growth and tissue regeneration. Most notably, Vree discovered that the mutant was completely sterile. It could not have been born naturally. It must have been created. The implications were chilling. Someone, somewhere, was manufacturing an army of these super mutants. The Brotherhood elders, concerned about the potential of an organized mutant horde, quietly enacted security measures. They imposed a temporary halt on initiating new recruits, fearing infiltration or divided focus, and sent covert scouts to the north and east to gather intelligence on this threat. The scouts ventured into dangerous territories, and not all returned. One team that headed east encountered a group of about 20 super mutants and barely escaped with a single survivor, who returned wounded and terrified with tales of mutant marauders. Scouting to the far north yielded nothing. Those scouts simply disappeared without a trace. Caravans from the hub also began to vanish along northern trade routes, lending credence to the idea that a growing mutant presence was encroaching from that direction. The Brotherhood's leadership was deeply divided on how to respond. Some argued for a preemptive strike, to seek out and destroy the source of these mutants immediately. Others counseled caution, noting that with so little information, charging in could be suicide. As debates raged in the Lost Hills Council chamber, a wanderer from Vault 13 arrived at the Brotherhood's doorstep, a wanderer who would change the course of history. This traveler is remembered only by the title, the Vault Dweller. He or she, as records differ, was a survivor from one of the sealed Vault-Tec vaults on a quest to save their own people by securing technology to purify water. In late 2161, the Vault Dweller came to the Brotherhood bunker seeking help and membership. The Brotherhood had a long-standing policy. They did not simply allow any outsider to join their ranks. Outsiders who showed interest were often given a daunting task as a kind of trial by fire, a fool's errand meant to test their mettle and perhaps dissuade the less serious. In this case, the elders sent the Vault Dweller on what they believed was a near impossible mission to travel to the ruins of the West Tech Research Facility, also ominously known as the Glow. The Glow was a heavily irradiated crater, the site of a direct nuclear strike during the Great War, still saturated with deadly radiation even 84 years later. Decades earlier, a splinter group of Brotherhood paladins, led by Sergeant Dennis Allen, had broken off during the Exodus and tried to loot that facility, but they never returned. The elders told the Vault Dweller to retrieve a holodisk from the Lost Brotherhood expedition at the Glow as proof of having been there. It was assumed that no ordinary person could survive such a journey, effectively serving as a polite dismissal of the Vault Dweller's request to join. To the Brotherhood's astonishment, the Vault Dweller succeeded, using wit, resources, and sheer resilience. This outsider journeyed to the Glow, braved its extreme radiation with the aid of Rad-X and protective gear, and managed to find the remains of the long-lost Brotherhood scouts. The Vault Dweller recovered the holodisk log of Sergeant Allen's ill-fated mission and returned to Lost Hills, alive, though doubtless sick with radiation exposure. This feat immediately earned the Vault Dweller immense respect. He had done the unthinkable and proven both courage and resourcefulness. True to their word, the elders granted the Vault Dweller provisional membership, making them the first outsider in many years to be inducted into the Brotherhood of Steel. Once inside the bunker, the Vault Dweller did not waste time. He shared crucial information he had gathered on his travels, tales of an entity called the Master, and an army of super mutants gathering strength in the northern reaches beyond the hub. This Master, it turned out, was a grotesque amalgamation of human and mutant, who was the puppeteer behind the mutant army. He resided in an underground lair in what was once the Los Angeles area, the Boneyard, and he had a twisted plan to convert all humanity into super mutants using the FEV virus, believing it to be the path to unity and peace. The mutants roaming the wasteland were the vanguard of this plan, capturing humans to be dragged off and dipped into FEV vats to create more of their kind. Upon hearing this, High Elder John Maxon and the Brotherhood Council were deeply alarmed. This confirmed their worst fears about the mutants' origin. Incredibly, it tied back to the same FEV research that had indirectly given birth to the Brotherhood decades ago. Though many in the Brotherhood were isolationist by inclination, the thought of humanity being forcefully mutated or wiped out spurred them to action. The Vault Dweller pleaded for the Brotherhood's assistance to stop the Master and his mutant army before it was too late. After deliberation, the elders agreed that this threat could not go unanswered. They authorized a strike team of the Brotherhood's finest paladins to aid the Vault Dweller. In the final months of 2162, the Vault Dweller and a contingent of Brotherhood paladins embarked on two critical assaults. One target was the Mariposa military base, ironically the same base where the Brotherhood's journey began. The Master's forces had occupied Mariposa and were using its FEV vats as a mass production site for new super mutants. The other target was the Master's personal sanctuary beneath the ruins of the cathedral in the Boneyard, with Brotherhood power armor and weapons lending an edge to the fight. The Vault Dweller infiltrated the heart of the mutant operations. In a climactic confrontation, the Master was defeated. Some say the Vault Dweller outwitted the abomination with logic or evidence of the mutant's sterility. Others claim a fierce battle ensued that ended with detonating explosives to destroy the Master and his warped flesh computer form. Simultaneously, the Brotherhood paladins fought pitched battles through the laboratories of Mariposa, eventually rigging the base's fusion core to explode. The entire facility, along with the FEV vats and hordes of mutants inside, was annihilated in a nuclear blast that shook the mountains. These actions effectively decapitated the mutant army, leaderless and unable to reproduce. The surviving super mutants scattered into the wasteland, no longer an organized threat. The Brotherhood of Steel had played a pivotal role in averting a second apocalypse, and their technological might had proven decisive. when aligned with the courage of a single vault dweller. After the dust settled, the Brotherhood stood as the most advanced and arguably most powerful faction in New California. They had superior armor, energy weapons, medical technology, including some understanding of implants and power generators, and now they had cemented their role as humanity's vigilant guardians against another monstrous foe. In the aftermath, they cautiously assisted other settlements in mopping up pockets of mutant stragglers, sometimes preferring to let mutants flee rather than slaughtering them needlessly, as the immediate crisis had passed. Apex and stagnation in California. Following the victory over the Master and the Unity, the name the Master had given his mutant cause, the Brotherhood of Steel enjoyed a period of prestige and influence at an all-time high. This era, the late 2160s through a few decades afterward, could be considered the Brotherhood's apex in California. Under the wise leadership of people like Elder John Maxon and the seasoned paladin turned Elder Rhombus, the Brotherhood transitioned from a wartime footing to a role of research and stewardship. They deliberately kept themselves out of direct governance. They did not seek to rule over the towns and villages of New California. Instead, they became a kind of advanced think tank and armory for humanity. They would dole out small pieces of technology to the wasteland in measured doses, to slowly uplift civilization without causing chaos. The Brotherhood carefully cultivated good relations with emerging regional powers. Chief among these was the New California Republic, NCR, a democratic federation of towns that began forming in the years after the mutant threat was vanquished. The NCR's founders were people dedicated to restoring law, order, and republican government to the wasteland, and the Brotherhood generally approved of these goals, even if they found the NCR's bureaucracy and rapid expansion somewhat concerning. The two organizations respected each other. The NCR needed the Brotherhood's technological knowledge at times, and the Brotherhood was happy to see humanity starting to rebuild society on its own. Relations were warm enough that one of the NCR's newly founded states was even named Maxon in honor of Roger Maxon and the Brotherhood's contributions to the region. Notably, however, the Brotherhood kept Lost Hills Bunker independent and outside NCR jurisdiction. They were friendly allies, but the Brotherhood maintained its autonomy. During these years, the Brotherhood's scribes and knights introduced various pre-war technologies back into society at a slow but steady pace. This included medical advances, agricultural improvements like better water pumps and irrigation techniques, and the occasional energy weapon gifted to town sheriffs to fend off raiders. They were very selective in these distributions, ensuring that no single group or settlement gained enough firepower to upset the balance of power. The Brotherhood saw itself as the gatekeeper of the old world's arsenal. Their policy was sometimes summed up as responsible drip feeding of technology. In essence, they let humanity relearn old sciences gradually, hoping to prevent any rapid misuse. Internally, the Brotherhood's culture became somewhat insular and proud during this golden age. After all, they had vanquished the wasteland's greatest menace and held knowledge no one else could match. It was perhaps inevitable that a degree of complacency set in as new generations were born into the Brotherhood. Some grew up taking their advanced gadgets and superiority for granted without understanding the struggles their founders went through. The Brotherhood's education shifted heavily towards the hard sciences and maintaining equipment, sometimes at the expense of teaching history or humanities. As a result, by the mid-22nd century, there were young Brotherhood initiates who could service a laser rifle or recite engineering manuals, yet they couldn't tell you much about Roger Maxon or the Brotherhood's founding principles. To some elders, this lack of historical perspective was an alarming development. The risk was that the Brotherhood might lose sight of its core mission and values. The danger of this technological hubris became clear as a new enemy quietly rose in the shadows. Around 2240, whispers began to reach the Brotherhood of Steel about an advanced, well-equipped faction operating from an old offshore military base, the remnants of the pre-war United States government itself, calling themselves the Enclave. The Enclave had access to technology even beyond what the Brotherhood had in some cases, including advanced power armor models and plasma weapons. For decades, the Enclave had hidden on an isolated oil rig, scheming to reclaim the mainland. When the Brotherhood first learned of them around 2241, it was through indirect means. Odd reports of vertibirds, advanced VTOL transport aircraft, flying out of Navarro, an old Air Force base in Northern California, and mysterious soldiers in black power armor kidnapping tribal people and vault dwellers. The Brotherhood, spread thin and somewhat secretive, had trouble gauging the Enclave's strength or intentions at first. While the Brotherhood observed cautiously, it was actually a new hero from outside that took action, the Chosen One, a descendant of the Vault Dweller, who in 2241 embarked on a quest that ultimately led to the destruction of the Enclave's oil rig and the collapse of their immediate plans. The Brotherhood's direct involvement in that episode was limited. They did, however, assist the Chosen One in some key ways, such as providing information and a vital mission. A team of Brotherhood agents asked the Chosen One to infiltrate the Navarro outpost to steal advanced Enclave vertibird schematics. That task was completed successfully, giving the Brotherhood valuable intelligence on Enclave technology. There are hints that Brotherhood and Enclave forces skirmished during the tumultuous events of 2242, when the Enclave tried to unleash a deadly bioweapon to wipe out all mutated life. After the Chosen One foiled that genocidal plan and the Enclave's leadership perished, the Brotherhood took it upon themselves to hunt down any surviving Enclave remnants on the mainland. However, the Enclave encounter was a wake-up call for the Brotherhood of Steel. It highlighted the fact that the Brotherhood had grown somewhat stagnant and arrogant. They had assumed themselves to be the pinnacle of technology in the wasteland, yet the Enclave appeared with even more advanced gear, such as the improved Mark II power armor, and nearly executed a plan that would have exterminated everyone outside their ranks. The Brotherhood had not been the ones to stop this threat. A lone outsider had. It stung the Brotherhood's pride, and also made clear that simply sitting on their trove of weapons was not enough to secure humanity's future. The elders at Lost Hills realized that the Brotherhood needed to adapt. They could no longer remain so insular and passive, waiting for threats to come to them. Additionally, the world outside was changing. The new California Republic was expanding aggressively northward and eastward, bringing more of the wasteland's population under its democracy. While the Brotherhood had cordial relations with the NCR, they could see that the NCR's values were not entirely aligned with their own. The NCR was built on ideals of the old world republicanism, rule of law, and civilian government, which the Brotherhood viewed with some skepticism. More pragmatically, the NCR's growth meant they were uncovering and using more pre-war technology themselves, often without Brotherhood supervision. All these factors led to a crucial shift in Brotherhood policy by the end of that decade. Under the guidance of a new generation of elders, descendants of the Maxon line and other veterans, the Brotherhood decided to end decades of relative isolation and take a more active hand in shaping the future. They began discussing expeditions beyond California to seek out old Brotherhood splinter groups and areas of interest, and to reclaim advanced technology before others, like the NCR or new threats, could grab it. This marked the end of the Brotherhood's long stagnation and the beginning of a more turbulent chapter in their history, where they would face both external wars and internal schisms. Conflict with the new California Republic, perhaps the most fateful development for the Brotherhood of Steel in the 2250s, was the deterioration of their relationship with the new California Republic. What had once been a friendly alliance gradually turned into mistrust and competition. The NCR kept growing in territory and population, absorbing more cities and resources. With growth came a greater appetite for technology to support their infrastructure and military. The Brotherhood, staunch in their belief that advanced arms should not be widely distributed, started to clash with the NCR's ambitions. Tensions rose as Brotherhood patrols began confiscating energy weapons and other tech from NCR citizens and soldiers whenever they encountered them outside NCR's core lands. From the Brotherhood's perspective, they were reclaiming dangerous technology that others should not have, but to NCR authorities, it looked like armed robbery and an infringement on their sovereignty. Minor incidents piled up into open hostility. By the late 2250s or early 2260s, diplomatic relations between Lost Hills and the NCR leadership had broken down. The disagreement over technology policy led to what history records as the NCR Brotherhood War. This conflict was not a single battle, but a prolonged series of engagements and strategic moves across multiple fronts. The Brotherhood, though smaller in numbers, had superior weaponry and power armor. The NCR had the advantages of a booming population, large conventional armed forces, and vast supply lines. The war was hard fought and costly on both sides. The Brotherhood initially attempted surgical strikes, hitting NCR research facilities, power stations, and military bases where advanced tech might be in use. NCR, in turn, mobilized entire regiments to assault known or suspected Brotherhood bunker locations. One by one, several Brotherhood bunkers fell or had to be abandoned. In some instances, Brotherhood paladins, rather than let their installations be captured, blew up their own bunkers in last-ditch self-destruction, denying the NCR any spoils. At least 4 Brotherhood strongholds were destroyed in this way, often with the loss of all knights inside, who stayed to rig explosives. The NCR paid dearly for its victories as well. Brotherhood raids managed to sabotage NCR gold reserves, causing financial panic and forcing the Republic to temporarily switch to fiat currency, which led to inflation issues. Brotherhood commandos disrupted NCR supply lines and inflicted significant losses in surprise battles. For the civilian populace of New California, it was a confusing time. Their protectors were now at war with their former allies. Many towns tried to stay neutral, but as the NCR was the governing authority, most communities ended up supporting the Republic's war effort by necessity. The most infamous single engagement of the war was the Battle of Helios I, known in NCR records as Operation Sunburst. Elder Elijah, one of the Brotherhood's more brilliant but eccentric leaders, had been tasked with leading the Brotherhood's Mojave contingent, a chapter that had branched off to the east, near the Mojave wasteland. Elijah became obsessed with a pre-war solar energy plant called Helios I, a facility capable of potentially controlling an array of orbital laser satellites, or at least generating massive power. He believed Helios I held the key to a superweapon or technology that could turn the tide of the war. Elijah concentrated nearly all the Mojave Brotherhood forces at Helios I, determined to defend it against the NCR at all costs, while he tried to unlock its secrets. In 2276, NCR Commander Lee Oliver launched Operation Sunburst, a full-scale assault on Helios 1. The NCR threw wave after wave of troopers at the facility. The Brotherhood, entrenched with fewer than 100 paladins and knights, managed to hold out for a time, using their superior firepower and the plant's defensive positions to repel assaults. But the NCR's sheer numbers and willingness to incur high casualties eventually overwhelmed the Brotherhood defenders. Elder Elijah, true to his stubborn nature, refused to retreat or surrender even when the battle was clearly lost. Half of his chapter was killed in the fighting, and NCR flags were raised over Helios 1 as Brotherhood survivors scattered. In the chaos of the final moments, Elijah himself vanished. Some say he fled into the desert, unwilling to face defeat. Years later, stories would emerge of a mad elder researching weapons in the shadows of the Mojave, but that's another tale. The Mojave Brotherhood survivors regrouped under a new leader, Nolan McNamara, and went into hiding in the Hidden Valley bunker complex outside New Vegas. With over half their members dead and NCR forces hunting for any stragglers, McNamara made the tough call to enact a total lockdown. The Mojave chapter sealed themselves underground, avoiding all contact with the outside world. They decided to wait, possibly for years, until the NCR would think them destroyed and lower its guard. Operation Sunburst marked effectively the end of large-scale hostilities in the NCR Brotherhood War. The Brotherhood had been dealt a significant blow and lost territory and resources, especially in the East. In New California proper, a few other Brotherhood bunkers continued to hold out or evade capture, but the Brotherhood's presence was greatly diminished and pushed to the margins. The NCR, while victorious, was left drained by the protracted conflict. Many NCR generals concluded that the Brotherhood was a spent force and no longer a major threat, a conclusion that would later be tested. Thus, by the late 2270s, the Brotherhood of Steel in the West had faded from a prominent power to a secretive, beleaguered faction. In the Mojave wasteland, Elder McNamara's chapter remained hidden in 2281, engaging only in limited scouting at night and struggling with internal debates on whether to stay isolated or attempt to negotiate with the NCR. In New California, the Brotherhood maintained a low profile as well, focusing on survival and rebuilding what they could in secret. They were far from gone, but their days of open influence were over for the time being. The Mojave chapter in Fallout, New Vegas. By the time of Fallout New Vegas in 2281, the Brotherhood's Mojave chapter had been in isolation for several years following the defeat at Helios 1. Elder Nolan McNamara led a diminished but tightly knit group of knights, paladins, and scribes in the Hidden Valley bunker, an underground complex outside the New Vegas region. Life in the bunker was grim and claustrophobic. The lockdown meant no one went outside except on critical missions. Many younger Brotherhood members had never seen the sun in years. They trained with virtual reality simulators for combat, but few had real battlefield experience. Morale was low, and supplies were finite. The air filtration system in the bunker was failing, causing chronic discomfort and reminding everyone that they couldn't hide below ground forever. Beyond the bunker walls, the Mojave wasteland was dominated by three powers vying for control of New Vegas and the Hoover Dam, the New California Republic, pushing eastward with an army 5 times larger than a few years prior. Caesar's Legion, a slave army from the east modeled after ancient Rome, and Mr. House, the enigmatic ruler of New Vegas Strip. All these factions were aware of the Brotherhood to some extent, and none viewed them favorably. NCR commanders like Colonel Moore still harbored grudges, considering the Brotherhood an enemy that might rise again. Caesar himself, well read in wasteland history, saw the Brotherhood as an obstacle that would need elimination eventually, calling them a tribe of hoarding technology fetishists with no vision for the future. Mr. House saw them as a threat to his control of New Vegas's high technology. In fact, if the player, the courier, interacts with each faction, it becomes clear that nearly everyone anticipates having to deal with the Brotherhood problem sooner or later. Inside Hidden Valley, a leadership challenge was brewing. Head Paladin Hardin believed that Elder McNamara's policy of continued lockdown was cowardly and dooming the chapter to a slow death. Hardin argued that they should lift the lockdown, resume aggressive operations against the NCR or others, or possibly relocate entirely. McNamara, however, felt that leaving the bunker would risk immediate annihilation by NCR forces that vastly outnumbered them. This internal schism simmered, with the potential to depose McNamara if enough paladins agreed with Hardin. The arrival of the courier Fallout, New Vegas's protagonist, in 2281 provided an opportunity for the Mohave Brotherhood's fate to change, depending on the courier's choices. The courier could remain an enemy or neutral, leaving the Brotherhood to either remain hidden or eventually be discovered and attacked by NCR or House's Securitrons. Alternatively, the courier could intervene to help the Brotherhood. One path involved ending the lockdown by resolving McNamara and Hardin's dispute. The courier could support Hardin's coup, or help McNamara fulfill certain obligations to satisfy the crew. With the lockdown ended, the Brotherhood could then contemplate a new role. The courier might broker a truce or alliance between the NCR and Brotherhood, convincing the NCR to pardon the Brotherhood in exchange for help against the Legion at Hoover Dam, or the courier might side with Mr. House or an independent Vegas, in which case they might have to eliminate the Brotherhood entirely to secure the region, since House in particular demands the Brotherhood's destruction, viewing them as too intransigent. Each possible scenario had very different outcomes for the Mojave Brotherhood. In one, they come out of hiding and forge a tentative peace with the NCR, allowing them to survive and gradually reintegrate into the post-war society, albeit likely under strict conditions and monitoring by NCR. In another, the Brotherhood in the Mojave is wiped out in a final stand against overwhelming force, and in yet another, if the courier leads an independent Vegas victory, perhaps the Brotherhood continues on, neither fully allied nor at war, a wild card factor in the Mojave's future. Canonically, there has been no definitive answer. The Brotherhood's fate in New Vegas remains uncertain and up to the player's decisions. What is clear is that by 2281, they were no longer a major player in the open politics of the Mojave. They were a hidden power that could either be extinguished or reignited, dependent on external influences. The Capital Wasteland Expedition, Fallout 3. Parallel to the Brotherhood's struggles in the West, an important chapter of Brotherhood history was unfolding on the East Coast. In 2255, the Brotherhood of Steel ventured farther than it ever had before, all the way to the ruins of Washington, D.C., to known in the wasteland as the Capital Wasteland. This journey was prompted by the Brotherhood's desire to end its stagnation after the Enclave encounter, and to recover more technology from the remains of the pre-war capital. The Lost Hills elders approved sending a contingent led by a highly respected paladin named Owen Lyons. Lyons was a seasoned warrior with a record of success in prior expeditions, including action against super mutants in the Midwest. His mission had multiple objectives: scour the capital region for any advanced tech, establish a permanent Brotherhood presence in the East, and investigate rumors of other surviving military installations or even old government bunkers. They also hoped Lyons' team might find or make contact with any lost Brotherhood chapters. For instance, they knew of a rumored Midwestern detachment around Chicago, though that remained elusive. The expedition that Lyons led included some of the Brotherhood's best. Among them was a squad of elite paladins and knights, and a contingent of scribes to handle technical tasks. Notably, Lyons was accompanied by his young daughter Sarah Lyons, who practically grew up on the road with the Brotherhood forces and trained as a squire. Another individual of interest on the journey was a child named Arthur Maxon, a direct descendant of Roger Maxon. The elders in California had sent the boy along both for his protection. Internal Brotherhood politics back west had turned fractious, and some thought the last Maxon might be safer far away, and as a way to groom him under Lyons' tutelage. After a long and arduous trip across North America, Lyons' expedition arrived in the Capital Wasteland a few years later, circa the 2270s. What they found was a land as harsh and lawless as any they had seen. Ruins were crawling with super mutants that seemed to spring from the depths of the city. These mutants were different from those in California. They were larger, more uniformly aggressive, but seemingly less intelligent. They were not led by a master-like figure. Rather, they operated in roving bands, dragging captives away to some unknown fate. It turned out that a Vault experiment at Vault 87 had spawned these mutants, who then spread throughout the urban ruins. Initially, Lyons focused on his original mission. The Brotherhood set up headquarters in the ruins of the Pentagon, which they dubbed the Citadel. From there, Lyons dispatched his scribes to collect any historical records from the Library of Congress and scavenged the museums for tech relics. They discovered and eventually reactivated a pre-war military project, an immense robot built as a last-ditch weapon against the Chinese, codenamed Liberty Prime. This giant robot became a symbol of Brotherhood might in the Capital Wasteland, though it took many years to fully repair and power up. As time went on, however, Lyons grew increasingly disturbed by the suffering of the people around him. The Capital Wasteland's inhabitants, scattered settlements like Megaton, Rivet City, and others, were under constant threat from super mutants, raiders, and a dangerous paramilitary group called the Enclave. Yes, the Enclave survived out east, too, though quiet, until 2277. Lyons remembered the Brotherhood's core mission to protect humanity, and in his view that meant not just hoarding technology, but using it to shield the innocent. Thus, Lyons made a controversial choice. He gradually diverted his chapter's resources away from purely scavenging tech and towards direct humanitarian and defensive actions. The Brotherhood of Steel in DC began actively fighting the super mutants, rescuing townsfolk, and escorting water caravans. They earned the nickname Lyons Pride, a play on Lyons' name for the elite squad that Sarah Lyons eventually led on heroic sorties. This approach was lauded by Wastelanders, who for the first time saw Brotherhood knights as true knights in armor, protecting them. But back home in California, the Brotherhood's High Council was displeased. This was not what they sent Lyons east for. They viewed his new focus as going native, squandering time and resources on outsiders rather than the Brotherhood's higher goals. Tensions grew between Lyons and his superiors. By 2275, the council officially branded Lyons a rogue, effectively cutting off support and communications to his chapter. Some members of Lyons' own team, those who were more orthodox in their beliefs, also became disillusioned. If the Brotherhood wasn't gathering tech and was instead playing sheriff, was it still the Brotherhood? Dissenters within Lyons' ranks broke away in 2276 to form the Brotherhood Outcasts. Led by Commander Caston, these outcasts left the citadel and moved to an old bunker at Fort Independence. They continued the original mission on their own, scavenging technology with no interest in aiding locals, and hoping one day to reconnect with the Western elders. The outcasts painted their power armor a distinct black and red, and would shoot at anyone, including former comrades, who tried to stop them from seizing advanced equipment. Despite this schism, Elder Owen Lyons remained steadfast in his convictions. By 2277, when the events of Fallout 3 unfold, the Capital Wasteland Brotherhood, often just called Lyons Brotherhood, was firmly entrenched at the Citadel. Elder Lyons, now aging, had the respect of his soldiers and the adoration of many locals. His daughter Sarah Lyons had grown into a formidable paladin and leader of the elite Lyons Pride. They were the defenders of downtown DC, holding back the mutant hordes from completely overrunning civilization. In 2277, a pivotal series of events took place. The Brotherhood encountered a wanderer known as the Lone Wanderer, the player character of Fallout 3, who was in search of their father and the secret to a pre-war purification device called Project Purity. Project Purity was a grand scheme to purify all the water of the tidal basin and distribute clean water across the Capital Wasteland, a true boon to humanity. James, the scientist father of the Lone Wanderer, had worked on this project with allies like Dr. Madison Lee, and importantly, with some Brotherhood support. Sarah Lyons and others had helped guard the facility in its early days. The project had stalled years ago due to attacks and logistical problems. When the Lone Wanderer arrived, events were set in motion to reactivate Project Purity. However, the Enclave, the very same Enclave remnants who had fled west, emerged from the shadows at this critical juncture. Under the command of President John Henry Eden, an AI in a presidential computer, and Colonel Augustus Autumn, Enclave forces poured into the Capital Wasteland. They seized the Jefferson Memorial, site of Project Purity, intending to use the water purifier as a means to control the population, with a nefarious plan to lace the water with a toxin to kill impure mutants. This led to direct conflict between the Enclave and the Brotherhood. The war in 2277 between Lyons Brotherhood and the Enclave was brief but intense. The Enclave initially had the upper hand, using advanced power armor, plasma weapons, and mobile bases like Raven Rock to stage operations. They even managed to kill James and take over the Purity control room. All hope seemed lost as Enclave troops fortified around the memorial. But Elder Lyons had one more card to play: Liberty Prime. After years of work, the massive war robot was finally battle-ready, programmed with an American patriotism subroutine and a deep arsenal of death rays and ordnance. In the climactic battle of Project Purity, Liberty Prime led the charge across the broken waterside plaza, cutting through Enclave soldiers with ease. Brotherhood Knights and the Lone Wanderer followed in its wake, pushing the Enclave back. Liberty Prime's onslaught was devastating to the Enclave's forces. The way was cleared for the Brotherhood to retake Project Purity. In the final moments, depending on choices made by the Lone Wanderer, the water purifier was activated successfully, though at great personal risk and possibly sacrifice to the lone wanderer, or Sarah Lyons. One of them had to enter the irradiated control chamber to input a code. With that, clean water began to flow out to the wasteland as aqua pura, a gift from the Brotherhood, and the memory of James' dream. The immediate enclave threat was neutralized. Their leadership at Raven Rock was destroyed. The lone wanderer may have had a hand in that, causing Eden to self-destruct the base. Mop-up operations continued as Brotherhood forces hunted down enclave stragglers in the following weeks. In fact, the Brotherhood even used Liberty Prime to assault the last enclave holdouts at the Adams Air Force Base during Fallout 3's Broken Steel add-on, though tragically the enclave managed to destroy Liberty Prime with a massive airstrike during that battle. Nonetheless, the Brotherhood emerged victorious in the capital wasteland. They were hailed as heroes by many for freeing the region from the enclave and gifting it clean water. Elder Lyon's decision to help the people had been vindicated in some eyes, but the Brotherhood paid a cost. Liberty Prime, their great trump card, was now a heap of scrap after the enclave counterattack, and the war had further thinned their already limited numbers. Elder Lyons himself was left to oversee distribution of aqua pura and rebuilding efforts, tasks more civilian in nature than the Brotherhood was used to. Elder Maxon Sess, reunification between Fallout 3 and 4. Not long after these triumphs and trials, a change of guard occurred. Elder Owen Lyons passed away a couple of years after the purifier was activated, around 2278. His daughter Sentinel Sarah Lyons, a hero of the Enclave War, was elevated to the rank of elder to lead the chapter. The future looked bright for the capital wasteland, with Lyons' legacy continuing. However, Sarah Lyons' tenure was cut tragically short. She was killed in action roughly a year or so later. The exact details were never fully disclosed, but the Brotherhood logs indicate it was during a skirmish with remaining enemies. The loss of two beloved leaders so close together threw the chapter into disarray. Leadership of the Capital Wasteland Brotherhood became unstable. A series of ineffectual elders were chosen by the remaining Brotherhood members, each failing to fill the Lion's shoes or to set a clear direction. Meanwhile, the ideological divide that Lyons had temporarily set aside began to resurface. Without the charismatic Lyons at the helm, some Brotherhood members wondered if they had strayed too far from the Codex. Others still believed in Lyons' approach of tempered altruism. The outcasts under Caston remained separate, but still existed in the region, nursing their grievances and waiting for an opportunity. Amid this uncertainty, the young Arthur Maxon came of age. Arthur had been just a child when he arrived with Owen Lyons. By 2277, he was a teenager learning under Lyons' wing. Now, with the chapter floundering, Arthur Maxon proved to be exceptionally capable and charismatic. In 2279, at the mere age of 12, Arthur distinguished himself by killing two raiders who ambushed his patrol, saving the lives of senior knights accompanying him. At 13, he managed to bring down a fierce deathclaw by himself, suffering a scar across his face. This feat in particular boosted morale and made the soldiers whisper that perhaps the soul of the founder indeed burned in this last Maxon. At 15, in 2282, Arthur Maxon achieved a nearly legendary deed. He tracked and slew a powerful super-mutant warlord named Shepard, who had been rallying the scattered mutants of DC for a renewed offensive. This victory was a turning point. Unknown to Arthur, the Western Elders had been monitoring the Capital Wasteland situation via whatever long-range communications they had re-established. Arthur's success convinced them that the East Coast chapter had hope, and perhaps that it could be brought back into the fold on their terms. The Western Elders formally promoted Arthur Maxon to the position of a provisional elder of the Eastern chapter in 2282, making him the youngest elder in Brotherhood history. With this authority, Maxson started to systematically reform the Brotherhood in D.C. He reached out to the Brotherhood outcasts and opened dialogue. Many of the outcasts, including their leader Caston, were weary after years of isolation and had also lost some of their own to wasteland attrition. Maxson brokered a peace and essentially convinced the outcasts to rejoin with the Citadel Brotherhood. In 2283, this reunification became official. The outcasts came back into the Brotherhood's ranks, bringing their knowledge and armory with them. This was a huge win for Arthur Maxson, reuniting a broken faction and pooling their strength. With a united force and the blessing of the West Coast elders, Arthur Maxson began steering the Eastern Brotherhood back toward more traditional lines. In his view, Elder Lyons had done what was necessary during desperate times, but now the Brotherhood needed to remember its central mission. That didn't mean abandoning the people entirely. Maxson had learned from Lyons' compassionate side too, but it meant putting the Brotherhood first and not becoming simple mercenaries or local police. Under Maxson's leadership, the Brotherhood Eastern chapter regained its discipline and sense of purpose. They started training new recruits vigorously, including accepting some promising locals as fresh blood, though with strict entry standards. They also started planning for an ambitious endeavor, expanding their reach across the coast. During the intervening years between Fallout 3 and 4, 2283 to 2287, Elder Arthur Maxson oversaw the construction of a massive airship, the Prydwen, utilizing schematics from the captured Enclave base at Adams Air Force Base and the engineering talents of both Outcast and Lyons Brotherhood scribes. They built this flying fortress to serve as a mobile command center. The Prydwen, launched in 2286, was a testament to the Brotherhood's renewed zeal. It was not just a vehicle, but a symbol that the Brotherhood of Steel was ascendant and could project power wherever needed. Arthur Maxson also codified a new balance in ideology. He respected Lyons' idealism, but combined it with the traditional Brotherhood zeal for controlling technology. In practice, this meant the Eastern Brotherhood under Maxson would still aid communities by eliminating threats like mutants or raiders, which aligns with helping humanity, but they would also be far more uncompromising in confiscating advanced technology and asserting the Brotherhood's authority. It was a middle ground meant to preserve the Brotherhood's core mission, while not entirely ignoring the altruistic lessons of the Lyons years. Maxson's charismatic leadership, martial prowess, and lineage all contributed to a sort of mythos around him. Some of the more zealous members began to revere him almost like the second coming of Roger Maxson, a notion Arthur himself tried to downplay, but it circulated nonetheless. By 2287, Elder Maxson's hold on the reunited, refocused East Coast Brotherhood was uncontested. The Brotherhood had grown into a formidable military force once more, boasting ranks of well-trained knights and paladins, vertibird gunships at their command, and the great airship Prydwen ready to carry them into battle. It was time to address the next looming threat on the East Coast, one that had been on the Brotherhood's radar, thanks to earlier scout reports. The mysterious faction known as the Institute in the Commonwealth, formerly Massachusetts. War for the Commonwealth, Fallout 4. Even before Arthur Maxson took charge, the Brotherhood had its eyes on the Commonwealth to the north. The Commonwealth was rife with rumors of an advanced shadow organization that kidnapped people and replaced them with synthetic humanoids, or synths. This shadowy group, the Institute, was essentially the bogeyman of the Commonwealth, whispered about in taverns from Diamond City to Bunker Hill. For the Brotherhood, any such advanced scientific enclave operating outside their control was a red flag. In fact, as early as 2280, Lyon's Brotherhood had dispatched small recon teams to Boston to investigate. The first team reported back success in finding technology, but the second team vanished entirely, presumably ambushed and wiped out. The third team, Recon Squad Gladius, led by Paladin Danz, managed to survive by going into hiding after heavy losses, and they eventually sent a distress call back to the Citadel. Upon receiving Paladin Danz's call for aid and hearing confirmation of the Institute's existence, Elder Maxon and the Brotherhood prepared for a major intervention. In 2287, the Brotherhood of Steel arrived in the Commonwealth in force. The sky over Boston darkened with the silhouette of the Prydwen as the massive airship moored itself above the Boston airport ruins, escorted by a fleet of vertibirds. Civilians in the Commonwealth looked up in awe and fear, as this was an unprecedented display of might. The Brotherhood had essentially brought a flying military base to their doorstep. Elder Maxon established the Brotherhood's Commonwealth chapter headquarters aboard the Prydwen and at the ground base in Boston Airport. Their objective was clear and publicly stated: to seek out and destroy the Institute, which the Brotherhood deemed a menace to humanity. The Institute's abuse of technology, particularly their creation of lifelike synthetic humans, was an abomination in the eyes of the Brotherhood. Not only did it involve highly advanced robotics and AI outside Brotherhood oversight, but the Institute's actions, kidnapping people, potentially infiltrating societies with imposters, threatened the fundamental trust and stability of human communities. To the Brotherhood, the Institute represented the very nightmare they existed to prevent, a technocratic cabal with no moral compass, endangering everyone with reckless experiments. Under Maxon's command, the Brotherhood forces and the sole survivor, the protagonist of Fallout 4, who often works with or for the Brotherhood, systematically started tackling threats in the Commonwealth. They wiped out pockets of super mutants and feral ghouls, and aggressively pursued any leads on synth activity. Tensions quickly rose between the Brotherhood and other Commonwealth factions. The Railroad, a secretive group dedicated to freeing synths from the Institute, naturally came into conflict with the Brotherhood, who saw synths not as persons, but as dangerous machines. The Brotherhood's hardline stance was that any synth not under Brotherhood control was a potential threat, so they intended to eliminate or capture synths, not liberate them. Meanwhile, the Minutemen, a local militia trying to rebuild communities, had a more neutral view, but were wary of the Brotherhood throwing its weight around. The campaign climaxed in what came to be called the Battle of the Institute, or broadly, the Commonwealth War. By working through the ruins and gathering intelligence, the Brotherhood discovered the Institute's secret entrance. With aid from the sole survivor, depending on the player's choices, the Brotherhood managed to breach the Institute's defenses. In one sequence of events, they teleport an assault team directly into the Institute using a commandeered teleportation device. Once inside, Brotherhood Knights and Paladins engage Institute coursers, elite synth guards, and scientists in a furious firefight among the sleek hallways of the underground facility. Eventually, the Brotherhood initiates a self-destruct of the Institute's fusion reactor. The soldiers evacuate with moments to spare, and the sole survivor delivers the detonation signal. In a tremendous explosion visible across Boston, the Institute is obliterated. Years of secretive research and questionable utopian dreams turn to radioactive rubble in an instant. The Brotherhood watches the eruption from the safety of the Prydwen, secure in the knowledge that another threat to humanity has been neutralized. Of course, that is one potential outcome. In alternate scenarios, the sole survivor might side with the Institute or the Railroad, leading to battles where the Brotherhood itself is defeated. For example, the Railroad might manage to plant charges on the Pridwin, causing it to crash and burn, or the Institute could unleash destructive countermeasures to wipe out the Brotherhood forces. But by the Brotherhood's intended vision, they destroy the Institute and stand as victors, claiming the Commonwealth. After the Institute's destruction, in the Brotherhood-favored ending, Elder Maxon addresses the people of the Commonwealth in a speech. He frames the Brotherhood as the saviors of the land, having removed a malignant evil that had preyed on them unseen. He calls upon the population to cooperate with the Brotherhood as they secure other dangerous technologies in the region. Indeed, the Brotherhood would next focus on rounding up remaining synths, decommissioning any Institute robots, and taking control of any advanced facilities left vacant. Maxon's Brotherhood also extends an offer to the sole survivor to become an official sentinel of the Brotherhood, one of the highest honors in recognition of their pivotal role. By 2287 and beyond, the Brotherhood of Steel under Elder Maxon finds itself arguably at one of its strongest points in history. It commands multiple chapters across the continent, the Western Elders in Lost Hills, the Eastern Branch under Maxon, which now spans the Capital Wasteland and Commonwealth, and known chapters in between like the Mojave, albeit weakened. They have a mobile air fleet, the most advanced pre-war weaponry at their disposal, and leadership that blends the zeal of the founder with the adaptability learned over 2 centuries of trials. However, challenges remain. The Brotherhood's very intransigence, its refusal to allow any rival to control technology, means it will always find itself at odds with new societies that grow and develop. Already on the West Coast, whispers of an impending showdown with the new California Republic were stirring again, as the NCR's expansion would inevitably brush up against Brotherhood holdouts in places like the Mojave or other unknown bunkers. And in the East, victory in the Commonwealth didn't necessarily ensure peace. The Brotherhood would have to govern its interactions with locals carefully or risk local resentment turning into another conflict. Nonetheless, the Brotherhood of Steel had proven resilient. From its humble beginnings as a band of survivors in 2077, it had risen, fallen, and risen again, continually adapting to the changing world while holding on to its core belief that the flame of humanity's knowledge must be kept burning, never again to be allowed to engulf the world in fire, but instead to light the way to a better future. Whether one views them as selfless knights or self-righteous hoarders, the Brotherhood's impact on wasteland history is undeniable and enduring. The Midwestern Brotherhood fallout tactics. Our exploration of Brotherhood lore wouldn't be complete without touching on some divergent paths the Brotherhood took outside the main canon of the numbered Fallout games. One such chapter is the so-called Midwestern Brotherhood of Steel, featured in the game Fallout Tactics: Brotherhood of Steel. While not considered strictly canonical by later games, this story offers a fascinating alternate look at how the Brotherhood's principles can evolve in different circumstances. The tale of the Midwestern Brotherhood begins shortly after the supermutant threat was eliminated in New California around the late 2160s. The Brotherhood's elders at Lost Hills grew divided on the organization's future. One faction, the minority, argued that the Brotherhood needed to expand its ranks by recruiting outsiders like tribals and wastelanders to bolster their numbers and spread their influence. The majority of the elders vehemently disagreed, insisting that the Brotherhood remain an insular group of descendants and select initiates to keep their bloodline and knowledge pure. This ideological rift reached a breaking point. The elders effectively exiled the minority who had advocated opening up the Brotherhood, but this exile came with a mission that doubled as a convenient way to remove dissent. They sent these brothers and sisters eastward on a campaign to search for and destroy remnants of the Master's super-mutant army that had reportedly fled east of the Rockies. Thus, around 2197, a large expedition departed Lost Hills, not unlike Lyon's later one, but this time in great flying airships, Zeppelins retrofitted with pre-war engines. This convoy of airships carried the dissident Brotherhood forces, hundreds of them across the continent, aiming for the last known location of mutant forces. As fate and dramatic storytelling would have it, the airship fleet encountered a massive radiation storm above the Midwest. The tempestuous weather battered the Zeppelins, and one by one they began to fail. Many crashed or were lost, and the leadership of the expedition perished in the chaos. What survivors managed to limp through the storm found themselves crash landing near the outskirts of Chicago. Cut off from Lost Hills and presumed dead, these Brotherhood survivors had to adapt quickly to their new environment. The American Midwest had its own wasteland societies quite different from California's. Scattered farming villages, tribal communities, and the ruins of pre-war cities dotted the landscape. Unlike in California, the people here had never seen power-armored knights or laser weapons. The arrival of the Brotherhood was almost like an encounter with aliens or demigods. Recognizing this, the Brotherhood survivors saw an opportunity, free from the dogma of the Western elders who had cast them out. They chose to build a new Brotherhood society that fit the conditions of the Midwest. Facing attrition and the loss of many elite members in the crash, the Midwestern Brotherhood started recruiting locally out of necessity. They offered protection, medicine, and knowledge to nearby villages in exchange for young capable recruits and labor. Before long, tribals and townsfolk were joining the Brotherhood's ranks. These new recruits weren't turned away for not being pure or born into the order. They were embraced and trained. Ghouls, super mutants, and even tame deathclaws were eventually accepted as allies or even as Brotherhood members, something utterly unthinkable in the West. The philosophy was to survive and fulfill our mission. We need manpower, regardless of origin, provided they swear loyalty to the Brotherhood's mission. This inclusive Brotherhood thrived in its own way. They established a chain of bunkers across what used to be the Great Plains and the Great Lakes region, operating from a central base known as Vault Zero, a massive vault command center in the Cheyenne Mountain complex. Through the events depicted in Fallout Tactics, the player's character, a Brotherhood initiate turned hero, known as the Warrior, leads Brotherhood forces against various threats menacing the Midwest. They combat raider tribes, such as a coalition of raiders early on, then eventually face off against a formidable mutant army, led by an entity calling itself the Calculator. The Calculator was actually a pre-war AI managing Vault Zero's systems, which had gone rogue and was churning out an army of cybernetic robots and cyborg mutants to cleanse the region of all life, a twisted interpretation of its programming to restore America. In a climactic battle, the Midwestern Brotherhood defeats the Calculator, but at significant cost. By the end of Fallout Tactics storyline, circa late 2190, CES to 2200, the Midwestern Brotherhood stands victorious and in control of a swath of territory around Chicago and beyond. In this alternate continuity, they become a sort of new regional power, far more expansionist and openly governing than the traditional brotherhood. They establish order and start reconnecting isolated communities under their protection. Their ranks are filled with a diverse array of humans from many backgrounds, and even friendly mutant units. It's hinted that eventually their influence might spread even further, perhaps one day reuniting with the West, or expanding east to contact places like the Capital Wasteland, though the main Fallout series never canonically covers this. Interestingly, Bethesda later made passing references to the Midwestern chapter in Fallout 3. An in-game computer entry mentions a Brotherhood detachment in Chicago that Lost Hills lost contact with, and some Legion soldiers in Fallout New Vegas mention fighting men in power armor in the East, hinting Caesar might have clashed with Midwestern BOS remnants during his campaigns. These little nods imply that while not officially part of the main story, something of the Midwestern chapter's legacy might exist in the periphery of the canon Fallout world. In any case, the Midwestern Brotherhood story stands as a testament to how necessity can reshape the Brotherhood's culture. Where the Western Brotherhood remained staunchly isolationist and conservative for a long time, the Midwestern branch chose pragmatism and inclusivity for the greater good, at least their version of the greater good, which still involved Brotherhood domination. They became more of a militant order, bringing law to the lawless places, acting almost like the origins of a new nation rather than a secretive sect. This demonstrates that the Brotherhood's core values, safeguarding humanity by controlling technology, can manifest differently depending on leadership and context. The Texas Expedition Fallout, Brotherhood of Steel, another alternate take on Brotherhood history, comes from the 2004 console game Fallout, Brotherhood of Steel. While this game is widely regarded as non-canon, and even Bethesda has stated its events are not considered part of the official storyline, it offers a glimpse of a Brotherhood mission in a region largely unexplored in other games, the former state of Texas. It's an interesting what-if side story that shows the Brotherhood's presence and struggles in yet another corner of post-war America. Set in the year 2208, Fallout, Brotherhood of Steel centers on a small Brotherhood contingent operating in the wasteland around Texas, places like Carbon and Los, which appear to be towns in the game. This is about a decade after the events of Fallout 1 and well before Fallout 2. According to the game's backstory, a group of Brotherhood paladins had ventured into Texas on a mission, but then went missing. The game's protagonist is a young Brotherhood initiate, one of 3 possible characters the player can choose, including an ex-raider named Cyrus, a ghoul named Cain, or a former slave named Nadia, notably showing the Brotherhood in this story recruiting from various backgrounds as well. This initiate is tasked with finding the lost paladins and completing whatever mission they had. As the initiate travels through Texas's arid wasteland, they discover towns under siege by raiders, mutated beasts, and other threats. In the town of Carbon, the Brotherhood presence, or lack thereof, is felt. The people had hoped the Brotherhood would protect them, but now they are disillusioned because those paladins vanished. The initiate has to win the locals' trust by dealing with a raider gang led by a woman named Jane. Jane and her raiders are causing havoc and were tangentially involved in the disappearance of the Brotherhood paladins. After defeating Jane, the initiate learns that the paladins had been investigating a growing super mutant presence in the region. Following the trail, the initiate ventures to a place ominously called Los. In the game, it's described as a ghoul's city built in the remains of a massive crater. Here, the initiate encounters a new master-like figure, a powerful super mutant named Attis. Attis had apparently been gathering super mutant forces and was involved in capturing the Brotherhood paladins. His goal was to use them and the resources at an old secret vault to create a new mutant army and possibly find a cure for the sterility of mutants. As part of his storyline, Attis was intelligent and had plans to evolve the mutants further. Attis serves as the primary antagonist. The initiate fights through mutants, robots, and other dangers in an effort to stop Attis's scheme. In the final confrontation at the secret vault's depths, Attis undergoes a grotesque transformation due to overexposure to FEV, or an experiment gone wrong. He mutates into a monstrous blob-like entity after an explosion, a horrific mass of flesh and tentacles that continues to fight even as it falls apart. The initiate manages to destroy Attis after a fierce battle. With Attis and his mutant army defeated, the crisis in Texas is averted. The game concludes with the implication that the Brotherhood will remain in the region to stabilize it and continue their mission. The initiate is hailed as a hero for saving the townsfolk and rescuing any surviving Brotherhood members, or at least avenging them. It also highlights that the Brotherhood depicted in this story was willing to work with outsiders. One of the playable characters is a ghoul, for example, suggesting this Texas group was more flexible out of necessity. While Fallout Brotherhood of Steel isn't set to part of the main lore, it interestingly mirrors themes seen elsewhere. The Brotherhood venturing out on quests far from home, small groups of Brotherhood knights getting isolated and needing either help or to adapt to local conditions. The recurring threat of super mutants and remnants of FEV experiments spawning new would-be masters, Attis in this case. The Brotherhood's ethos of fighting these threats and collecting lost technology, but also the potential of them inspiring local hope or disappointment depending on their success. In the broader context of Fallout lore, one could imagine that even if this exact story didn't happen, the Brotherhood likely did send many small expeditions across North America over the decades, some of which might have gone silent or met unknown fates. The wasteland is vast, and the Brotherhood's reach, while impressive, wasn't omnipotent. There were always corners of the continent where things like Attis's plan could brew, requiring local heroes to step in. Organization and ideology of the Brotherhood. Having recounted the Brotherhood of Steel's extensive history across various regions and timelines, it's worth summarizing how this unique organization actually functions, their internal structure, beliefs, and how those evolved or stayed the same through the years. Understanding the Brotherhood's culture gives insight into why they acted as they did in all those historical events. At its core, the Brotherhood of Steel is a quasi-religious, techno-military order. The early members took on a kind of knightly ethos. They saw themselves as protectors of something sacred, in their case, technology and human knowledge. While not a religion in the worship of deity sense, the Brotherhood often approaches advanced science with reverence. Terms like the Holy Fire have been used by some Brotherhood members to refer to nuclear power, and they maintain a codex that outlines their doctrines with almost scripture-like authority. Hierarchy and ranks. The Brotherhood's hierarchy is strictly defined. At the top is the High Elder, or sometimes just Elder for a chapter leader. This is the ultimate decision-maker and keeper of the Brotherhood's vision. Originally, Roger Maxson was the sole elder, and later High Elder, with a council of elders forming as the group grew. Each major chapter, West Coast, East Coast, etc., tends to have its own elder in command, and a ruling council might exist at the main headquarters, like the Council of Elders at Lost Hills. Beneath the elders are the paladins, knights, and scribes, the three main castes of the Brotherhood. Paladins are the elite warriors. They wear the heaviest power armor, carry the best weapons, and lead others in battle. The term itself evokes the paladins of Charlemagne, or Arthurian knights, noble warriors. In Brotherhood society, paladins often also take on command positions in field operations. Knights are also warriors, but generally of the rank-and-file variety. They are skilled in combat, and also serve as technicians and mechanics, especially in maintaining the Brotherhood's power armor and arsenal. In some Brotherhood chapters, knights focus on the engineering side of things, repairing weapons and armor, while paladins handle more strategy and pure combat leadership, though both fight when needed. Scribes are the scientists, doctors, and scholars of the Brotherhood. They usually don't fight on the front lines, though they can if needed, and some do carry weapons. Scribes are tasked with researching new findings, analyzing recovered artifacts, and keeping records. They are the ones who operate computers, study chemistry, biology, physics, and archive the Brotherhood's collected knowledge. Many scribes are somewhat akin to medieval monks copying manuscripts, but here they might be dissecting an enclave plasma rifle to understand how it works, or trying to decipher old databanks. There are sub-ranks within these categories, initiates being new hopefuls still proving themselves, apprentices among scribes, junior knights, etc., rising up to senior paladin, head scribe, and so on. Titles like Sentinel and Star Paladin have been used for special distinguished roles. For example, Sentinel Lyons was a unique title. Elder Lyons gave his daughter as an advisor field commander, and Star Paladin Cross in Fallout 3 was a revered veteran guarding Lyons. The Codex, the Brotherhood Codex, is their set of laws and moral guidelines. It emphasizes things such as preserving advanced technology and knowledge, keeping dangerous weapons out of the wrong hands, remaining united and loyal within the Brotherhood, distrust of outsiders with technology. If wastelanders understood the value and danger of technology, the war might not have happened, is a common sentiment. The Codex functions almost like scripture. Breaking it is considered heresy or treason within the Brotherhood. For instance, giving energy weapons to outsiders would violate the Codex and result in severe punishment. Veronica, a scribe from New Vegas, laments that the Codex is so strict, it stifles necessary change, like helping the NCR fight the Legion, which some elders refuse to do due to Codex isolationism. Recruitment and family. Early on, after 2141, the Brotherhood ceased taking new members from outside and relied on natural growth. That is, the children of Brotherhood members were raised within the order, often becoming squires and later knights or scribes. This led to a tight-knit, almost familial culture, but limited their numbers and perspectives. Over time, some chapters relaxed this, notably Lyon's chapter accepted the Lone Wanderer and others, and Maxon's later Eastern Brotherhood recruited from wastelanders showing promise. Traditional elders viewed outsider recruitment with suspicion, worried it could dilute their values or risk security. Lifestyle and training. Life in the Brotherhood is austere and disciplined. From youth, squires are educated in both technical knowledge and combat training. There is a monastic quality. Luxuries are few. Duty is emphasized above personal desires. Brotherhood bunkers are self-sufficient complexes where members eat in common halls, train in simulators or sparring rooms, maintain weapons in workshops, and study in archives. The Brotherhood's reverence for the past means they often preserve books, holotapes, and functioning computers that most wastelanders wouldn't even understand how to use. Attitude toward outsiders. The Brotherhood's view of the outside world ranges from benign condescension to outright contempt. Many brothers and sisters truly believe they are humanity's best hope, and that outsiders are too ignorant or irresponsible to be trusted with technology. This can make them seem arrogant, even tyrannical to others. They might confiscate a plasma rifle from a caravan guard and send him away with a lecture that he's safer without it, leaving the poor guard bewildered and defenseless. This paternalistic attitude has earned the Brotherhood both respect and resentment. In places like the Mojave, NCR citizens spoke of the Brotherhood as if they were myth, a deadly myth that would appear, take your energy weapons, and vanish. In the capital wasteland, by contrast, the Brotherhood under lions was seen as heroic protectors because lions deviated from the usual stance. Symbols and rituals. The Brotherhood's emblem, a sword atop a series of gears, flanked by wings, perfectly encapsulates their identity. The sword for martial might, the gears for technology, the wings perhaps symbolizing the uplifting of humanity, or the guardian angel aspect. They paint this logo on power armor shoulder plates and flags. Their motto, often heard in Fallout 4, is Ad Victoriam, Latin for to victory, which is less about any specific battle and more about the perpetual quest for victory over the darkness of ignorance and ruin. It signifies that every action, every day, is in service of an ultimate triumph for civilization. Ritual-wise, the Brotherhood has a ceremony when inducting a new knight or paladin, often involving taking an oath on the Brotherhood Codex. The details aren't publicly known, but based on dialogues, they likely swear to follow the Codex, never reveal Brotherhood secrets, and serve humanity. There's also a hint of reverence for their founding figures. For example, Roger Maxson is almost like a patron saint, and some splinter groups in the West even started worshipping his ideals to an extreme. A few Fallout 4 lore terminals mention cults that deified Maxson, which Arthur Maxson himself found troubling. Internal factions. Over time, splits like the Outcasts show that not all Brotherhood members agree on interpretation of their mission. Traditionalists want to stick strictly to the Codex. No outsider help, pure tech hoarding, minimal interference, except to acquire tech or fight threats. Restorationists / nation builders, like Lions, believe the Brotherhood should actively help rebuild society and protect people, even if it means bending some rules or cooperating with outside communities. Expansionists like the Midwest chapter in Tactics favor recruiting outsiders and spreading the Brotherhood's influence openly. Isolationist hardliners, like Elijah initially, or some outcasts, might even avoid all contact and retreat to hidden bunkers with their toys, waiting out the world. These philosophies can put elders at odds, and as we saw, cause actual splits in the organization. Yet, despite quarrels, the Brotherhood brand is strong. Splinter factions often still call themselves Brotherhood of Steel and honor the legacy of Maxson. In summary, the Brotherhood of Steel is part knightly order, part technological convent, and part military fraternity. Their journey from the Mariposa Rebellion to the Commonwealth Campaign spans over 2 centuries of hardship, triumph, and soul-searching about what their true role in the post-nuclear world should be. They started as saviors in their own eyes, saving technology from humanity and humanity from technology at the same time. In practice, they've been villains in some stories and heroes in others. But regardless of perspective, when Brotherhood paladins in power armor loom on the horizon, or a Brotherhood vertibird roars overhead, the wasteland pays attention, with their energy weapons humming and eyes ever watchful for pre-war secrets. The Brotherhood of Steel marches on into the future, driven by a promise made long ago by men and women who refuse to let civilization's light die. In their ranks, the phrase Ad Victoriam is both a salute and a prayer, that through vigilance, knowledge, and steel, victory will eventually be achieved for mankind. Thank you for listening to this comprehensive lore exploration. May the steel of your convictions remain unbroken, and may we all find the wisdom to use the gifts of the past wisely in forging a new dawn. Ad Victoriam.